Iceman. Robert Drake was just your average teenager, without a care in the world. But all that changed the day his mutant gene kicked in, and he became Iceman. When he first joined the X-Men, Bobby spent more time goofing around than practicing with his powers, but he still played a key part in the Marvel Universe. Bobby was one of the original X-Men. Also, he helped to form the Champions and the New Defenders. Let's take a look at Marvel's icy hero. Who's the coolest Marvel superhero? Spidey? Wolverine? The Punisher? No. The cold, clinical answer has to be Iceman. He never has to drink a warm beer. Girls are impressed by his smooth, glistening ice slide. He can keep a steak and kidney pie in his pocket for months without it going off. And he was one of the founding members of the X-Men. If you're only familiar with the embryonic Iceman of the X-Men films, you've not seen Bobby Drake at his refrigerated best. Iceman can freeze the water molecules of the air around him, instantly sculpting offensive weapons, defensive structures, and huge arching ice slides to get himself around. He can lower the temperature around any opponent, encasing them in a block of ice. Recently, his powers have developed in some surprising new directions, as we shall see. When we first encounter Iceman in X-Men 1, he resembles Frosty the Snowman, his entire body sheathed in a coating of snowy ice. Before long, he manages to harden this icy shell and develops a smooth, crystalline appearance. He's able to revert to human form at will, though this leaves him as vulnerable as any teenager. Despite his being the youngest member of the team, his abilities prove invaluable for immobilizing adversaries and disabling their dastardly devices. At the very least, he can make foes slip up to their backsides again and again until they give up. Born Robert Louis Drake in Fort Washington, Long Island, Bobby had a normal childhood, but found himself constantly shaking and feeling cold as he entered adolescence. He discovered that, with a gesture, his hands would emanate a wave of supercooling energy, an ice blast that froze anything in its path. Fearing people's reaction, he kept his uncanny ability to himself until he was attacked whilst on a date with a local girl. Rocky Beasley and his gang got a snowy surprise when Bobby used his powers to encase the bully in a block of ice. The gang ran away in fear. Sadly, so did Bobby's date. As news spread of the freak in their midst, the local folk broke into the Drake house with a huge gritting machine and proceeded to beat the snowflakes out of him. It took the intervention of the local sheriff to disperse the mob, but he also locked Bobby in a jail cell for his own protection. As Bobby languished in the cooler, no doubt envisioning a lifetime of being protected in a variety of locked rooms, the exterior wall exploded, and in stepped a young man wearing goggles. Cyclops invited Bobby to join him as the second recruit to the X-Men, an offer that was impolitely refused, and the two ended up having a bit of a scrap. The angry townsfolk outside joined in, until Professor Xavier arrived and psychically froze them in place, and convinced Bobby's parents that he should join the School for Gifted Youngsters. The original X-Men team was completed by the arrival of Warren Worthington III, Jean Grey, and Hank McCoy, who would become Bobby's best friend in the group. In between training sessions and fighting mutant menaces, Hank and Bobby hang out at the Cafe A Go-Go, double dating the waitresses and listening to really rubbish beat poetry by bearded men. Amongst the strangest teens of all time, Bobby enjoyed an untypical teenager's life, until he fell in love with the wrong woman. The beautiful, green-haired Lorna Dane possessed magnetic powers similar to the X-Men's arch-foe Magneto. In fact, for a while, she wrongly believed herself to be his daughter. After Bobby discovered that her real parents had actually died in a plane crash and her memories returned, Iceman got the hots for the magnetic mutant, just in time for her to adopt the name Polaris and aim herself at Cyclops' hunky brother, Alex Summers, aka Havoc. Bobby was left playing with his icicles. During a lull in their world-saving activities, Hank and Bobby broke away from the group for a while. Hank devoted himself to research that would accidentally leave him covered in fur. Bobby attempted to establish himself as a bona fide superhero, worthy of the attention of green-haired girls. He helped Spider-Man bring in a gangster called Bullet, and occasionally helped out his former teammates until Professor X and Cyclops formed an entirely new international band of X-Men. Iceman and Angel moved out to Los Angeles and decided to set up their own team, recruiting the Olympian Hercules, Russian super spy the Black Widow, and the demonically powered Ghost Rider to join them as the Champions, storefront superheroes. The idea was literally to set up shop and hire themselves out like a team of emergency glaziers. Did it pay off? Well, you know how there's always one shop in any mall that never seems to do much business. Despite the addition of another sexy Russian, Dark Star, the Champions didn't fare too well. Bobby fancied Dark Star rotten, but as with Lorna Dane, she only liked him as a friend. He was heartbroken when she returned to Russia, and the whole team disbanded shortly afterwards. There's a charity shop there now. The story of the Champions wasn't quite over, though. An earlier battle with an armoured villain called Rampage had left the bad guy paralysed, but he managed to hypnotise Iceman into donning his armour and going off on a crime spree. Bereft of teammates, Angel managed to get Spider-Man to help, which became a bit more difficult when they discovered who was inside the armour. When Bobby was finally released from Rampage's control, he decided that he was actually a bit rubbish at the whole superhero thing, and decided to jack it in and go to college. His hero identity was put on ice while Bobby struggled with exams and all-night revision, until he received a telepathic distress call from Professor Xavier. The X-Men were being blackmailed into going up against Doctor Doom, their friends and relatives held hostage by arch-manipulator Arcade. Iceman had to team up with other X-associates, Banshee, Havoc, and Polaris, in order to free everyone and save the day. Time away had obviously been good for Bobby, as he finally got over Lorna being with Alex, and they parted on good terms. Bobby returned to college, but was soon roped into joining the New Defenders. Along with Angel, Beast, and a few remaining members of the original team, Valkyrie, Gargoyle, and Moondragon, he was soon besotted by a new member, Cloud, a beautiful woman who could turn into a cloud and a man. It turned out that she, or it, was actually a weird nebular being with amnesia. On regaining her memory, she quickly made her excuses and returned to the stars, leaving Bobby all alone once more. Still, there's nothing like the death of your teammates from taking your mind off women, as Iceman, Beast, and Angel found when the rest of the New Defenders sacrificed their lives to defeat the Dragon of the Moon. When Jean Grey was found and revived from suspended animation, having been trapped at the bottom of the Jamaica Bay while Phoenix took her identity, the original X-Men got together again as X-Factor and tried very hard not to take on any pretty new members. After working with his teammates against such bad guys as Apocalypse, the Right, and the Alliance of Evil, Iceman found himself used by Loki as a pawn against Thor. His powers were increased by the god of mischief to uncontrollable levels. Bobby needed a special inhibitor belt in order to suppress them. But had Loki augmented Bobby's abilities, or simply tweaked what he found? While he attempted to bring his powers under control, Bobby started dating a Japanese woman called Opal. Thankfully, she wasn't a Russian agent or a Nebula, but she was part of a clan of Yakuza cyber samurai, which caused a bit of a fuss. When Bobby took Opal home to meet the folks, His father was far from cool about Opal's Japanese heritage and revealed himself to be an unlikely bigot. Luckily, Bobby didn't bring home the gender-switching Nebula Girl Blowy Cloud thing. X-Factor rejoined the X-Men proper, and Iceman regained full control of his abilities. During a row with Mikhail Rasputin, the brother of Colossus, the Mad Russian's matter energy warping powers turned Bobby's whole body into solid organic ice. Drake began to experiment and realized that he'd been underusing his powers. He could cover himself with frozen armor and icy spikes. He could even completely change his form, at one point becoming an ice slick from which giant icy fingers formed to grab a fleeing felon. All of this failed to impress Opal. Fed up with being placed in danger, she gave him the cold shoulder. It had taken Loki to unleash Iceman's potential as a heavy hitter, and Mikhail Rasputin to show him just how powerful he might become. However, it was Emma Frost, the White Queen, who discovered that Bobby had abilities he'd never imagined. An electrical power surge briefly transferred her mind into Bobby's body, which she used in a number of surprising ways. As she sought to flee the X-Men's mansion, leaping into a river, she froze the surface to evade capture and emerged 5 miles downstream a few seconds later. Via the White Queen, Iceman learned that he could travel through any stretch of water at great speed and reconstitute himself at the other end, and that if his body was shattered in its ice form, he could grow a new one from the water vapor in the air. The only problem was that Emma Frost wouldn't tell him how she'd done it, even after Bobby was left with a huge hole in his frozen chest during a battle against Onslaught's agent, Post. Unable to return to human form without leaking vital organs, he begged Emma Frost for help. She maintained that he needed to work it out for himself, that he'd never pushed his own abilities and been content to just slide along. As she telepathically encouraged him to face his fears and failures, he managed to heal himself and change back to human form with no ill effects. Along with the mutant Cannonball, Iceman infiltrated the campaign staff of anti-mutant presidential candidate Grayson Creed, and was shocked to see his father speak up for mutant rights during a live debate, given his less-than-tolerant past. Creed sent the boys round to put Mr. Drake into hospital, and Bobby took a leave of absence from the X-Men to care for his father. He returned to the fold several times in order to battle the Bastion, the Prime Sentinels, and the Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and to help his old buddy Hank McCoy secretly enter the country of Genosha in order to study the effects of the Legacy virus, and an anti-mutation wave unleashed by the High Evolutionary. Along with other mutants, both good and evil, Iceman was recruited by the living starship Prosh to become one of the Cataclysm Keys. During this adventure, through time and space, Bobby gained new levels of control over his powers, leading him to rejoin the X-Men full-time. However, it seemed that as soon as Bobby ever felt fully in control of his abilities, his body would present a few new surprises. During a battle with Black Tom Cassidy, he wound up with another hole through his frozen chest, but this time it didn't heal when he returned to human form. Luckily, it was just a flesh wound, but this was obviously a sign that he was undergoing a kind of secondary mutation. Before long, Bobby found that parts of his flesh and blood body were turning to solid ice, and that he might become permanently trapped in his ice form. Then, to make matters worse, Havoc nicked another girlfriend from under his nose. From the first time he used his powers in public, Iceman has struggled to master his abilities, and had rotten luck with women. In time, though, he could become one of the most powerful mutants on Earth.